Welcome to Conversations with CSG, the global talent podcast from CSG Talent. We interview influential figures across a wide range of innovative and impactful industry sectors worldwide, discussing career journeys, overcoming challenge, achieving success, diversity, and much more. I'm sure you'll see value in a lot of the topics we cover. So here it is. Hope you enjoy.
Welcome to Conversations with CSG. Today we're joined by Elinor Harrison, Integrated Risk Lead at EDF Energy. Elinor, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
I'm happy to be here. Good to get out and do something different than my usual day job.
Okay, so looking back at your academic studies, you gained a degree in chemical engineering with honours in sustainable engineering. Did you always have a career path in mind following this, and where did the passion for engineering come from?
So I will admit engineering as a career was something I'd never even considered. It was something never really talked about, something family weren't aware of, something didn't really talk about even in the school. It literally came up as we'd done a career survey during one of our PSHE classes in the library, and it recommended 3 careers. One was to be an accountant, which my parents had done. One was to be an actuary, which I'd never heard of, so I asked my mum, and she said that's for people too excited by numbers to become accountants. Which sounded very dull. So the next one was chemical engineering. It looked like it had good pay. It was involved in industries I hadn't even considered would need engineers before. So I looked at the degrees and ended up doing a few visits to university, and that's where it came from. When it came to even moving into the nuclear power industry, again, something I'd never even heard of that we'd had in the UK was nuclear power plants. Even just from electricity is made, and it was a case of it was just made and it got there. I'd never questioned it. It was only through a summer job I'd had designing power stations that were coal power stations, geothermal power stations, I realized how much broader electricity generation was. And then from there, I was basically doing the usual of applying for graduate schemes, applying to different companies, and sounds terrible, EDF said yes. So it was a case of, it was a well-paid graduate scheme. I was like, yes, I will take that. I even had the joy of, at the time of when I did the final interview and I was waiting to found out I got the job. Unfortunately, Fukushima happened within the same week, which was a great way to go from, yay, I'm starting a career in nuclear power to, oh no, the nuclear industry's going
this is dangerous.
It's going completely different direction. So yeah, completely different, never planned it. And that's similar to a lot of my career. It's been, that job looks interesting, that's something I fancy trying to do. So it's never something that I've pre-planned at all.
Okay. Can you briefly talk us through your current role at EDF then?
So my current role is in the nuclear operations part of the business, which is looking after the 5 nuclear generating power stations, plus the 3 defueling stations. And I work in the enterprise risk management part of the business. So that's owning the process of overall risk management. So it's not what people would assume of your health and safety risk management or that side of things, but it's your big ticket item. So it's looking at risks from cybersecurity, grid stability, climate change, health and well-being, staffing levels, or the risks that can be generated from it. And that's on top of the ones you'd expect, such as the electricity prices and what's happening with them. Are we making enough electrical output, and how good are we doing at defueling? So it's looking after the process itself and helping the stations comply with it, but also managing the larger ones that are across multiple stations at the same time.
Okay. So nuclear energy plays a part in reducing the reliance on more traditional fossil fuels, but naturally this presents some challenges. What are the core challenges within nuclear power right now?
So within nuclear power at the moment within the UK, big challenge is that we have the existing nuclear fleet who have had their life extended safely several times already. But it is a case of those power stations are old and we should have the new generations operating by now. It's the usual thing you have, similar when you have your cars. The older they get, the more expensive they become to fix and to keep running. So we're keeping them running safely, but it becomes less and less economically viable to keep doing that. And that makes it more expensive to run them. And therefore, there is a point where you have to say it's not sustainable to keep going in this manner. The other aspect we have is having what we term in the nuclear industry SQEP resourcing. So that's suitably qualified and experienced personnel. Getting someone qualified in the nuclear industry takes a long time, as you would expect, because of the special nature of nuclear power. And you have to build that into all your timelines of when you're changing staffing, dealing with recruitment, retirements, and it requires a lot of planning, right from how many people do you want to support through university, industrial placements, graduates, apprentices. And people like to move around within the nuclear power industry. And there's a lot of loyalty to nuclear power itself, but you still have to do that planning when you know that the power station is coming to the end, which is difficult.
Understood. And so the general perception of nuclear fuel isn't always the most positive. How can we change that, and how green is the nuclear industry?
So the nuclear power industry has had a lot of big accidents that people are aware of. So Fukushima, I've already mentioned. There's been Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, and Windscale within the UK as well. A lot of people have the natural reaction of radiation is scary, radiation is dangerous, and part of that is the education for how dangerous is it and how long lasting is the radioactive radiation effects. And a lot of it is an education piece, unfortunately. Some of it requires an understanding of nuclear physics and the chemistry that goes on. And some of it is a case of explaining to people in terms they understand, such as the radiation level of how many X-rays is it equivalent to, how many international flights is it, because you actually get exposed to radiation when you take any type of flight across the world. But also things as simple as how many bananas have you eaten, because the potassium in bananas is radioactive. Or one that's less talked about is depending on where you are in the UK, you get exposed to different levels of radiation. So, for example, living in a part of the country where it's got a granite bedrock exposes you to argon gas. And argon is actually radioactive, and that can build up in your home and actually give you a radiation dose as well. So it's about understanding, is it the equivalent to a 2-week holiday in Cornwall? Is it the equivalent of eating 20 bananas? Or is it the equivalent of eating X-ray? Generally, a lot of our radiation is down at the eating a few bananas, having a holiday in Cornwall, never and nowhere near even the levels of an international flight.
Wow.
And that is a big education piece. In terms of how green it is, it's a lot greener than people expect. Our biggest emissions in the carbon life cycle are actually during the construction era. There's a lot of concrete that's used. You use a lot of metals that require welding, require a lot of high energy at the time. But after the power stations have been constructed, they obviously don't produce carbon dioxide emissions. There's no large amounts of waste that are produced. You have the fuel that's obviously being irradiated and requires safe disposal and storage, but actually the volume of that is incredibly low. So again, it comes down to a bigger education piece, which the BBC's done some really good work on in terms of documentaries, which I highly recommend.
A lack of understanding from the wider public then has led to a negative perception.
I would agree. So yes, it's one of the things that unfortunately it requires a longer conversation that most people are able to have or are able to have. And it requires a lot of qualified people to talk about it and a lot of people to not only explain their experiences, but explain it in language that people are familiar with, which is difficult to try and verbalize very, very clearly.
Yeah, I can imagine. And people tend to focus on when things go wrong. I guess bringing it back to you then, you've been with EDF since graduating. You've worked across several roles and a number of locations. What's made you stay for such a long time, and what makes EDF such a great employer to work for?
Well, as you mentioned, I started when I finished university. That was in 2011. I've been a graduate doing a graduate scheme where I got to go work at a couple of power station plus our central engineering offices. So I got to try different parts of the business before I actually settled on where I wanted to be. I then worked in our Gloucester office for a year where I was actually doing what most people would assume engineering is. It's lots of technical calculations, working on computers, that side of things. And I was there for a year before I went into shift operations. I worked in the control room of Hartlepool Nuclear Power Station. So I was one of the people pressing the buttons, working night shifts, actually operating the plant, looking after a nuclear reactor and its steam turbine. And then I worked into what's called independent oversight, which is where I moved to Hunterston Nuclear Power Station on the west coast of Scotland. So, and in there, I'm going around, I'm looking at how other people are doing the jobs I used to do and going, how compliant are you? Are you delivering best practice? Are there improvements? And coming in with an independent view. And then I ended up in my current role in enterprise risk management. So you can see I've had a lot of interesting jobs. I've had a
Yeah.
lot of variety in my jobs. Even when I've been in one particular role, I've had a lot of sub activities that I've carried out, whether that be going out with overalls on and operating the valves, isolating pieces of equipment for maintenance to be carried out on them. Um,
Hmm.
I had to learn to fight fires with hoses when I was in shift operations at Hartlepool. I
Wow.
learned how to do casualty rescue and first aid. When I was at Huntston in independent oversight, I learned about broader health and safety, making sure signage was clear, making sure that there was compliance with broader regulations such as the Electricity at Work Act, precious staining systems regs. I think I've got the wording wrong on that one, but it's PSSR. And it's been a broad technical amount of information. And not many people can say they've had that breadth of experience within one employer.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, EDF offers a very comprehensive benefits package. So on top of the fact that I actually get a very good salary, it's even things like the maternity leave is 30 weeks of full pay. The
Wow.
pension is 7.5% employee with an extra 15% employer. So that's
Right.
22.5% paid into my pension every year. And then on top of that, there is a grant you can get every year to put towards personal development training courses. You can ask for
Wow.
support for if you're doing a degree and release for doing studies. You can get the standard benefits of you get holidays. I think you start at within nuclear operations, 28 full days of leave plus the 8 bank holidays, and that goes up as you've been around a long time. EDF firmly believes in joint working with trade unions, so we've got a collective agreement, pay is negotiated every year collectively for everyone. So EDF overall is a very good, well-rounded employer in what they offer as a broader package. So even despite the fact the work's been interesting, I've really liked my job. On top of that, I have felt rewarded for staying
Mm.
with the company, and I've had those development opportunities where line managers have gone, do you know what, you fancy trying something a little different? Let's give you something extra to broaden your horizons.
Yeah, sounds the perfect match, really. Interesting work and a good employer.
Pretty much.
So, engineering has always been, and despite progress, still is a male-dominated field. What challenges have you faced both through your academic and professional journey, and how have you overcome them?
So I will admit some of my experiences are older. For example, my university experience finished in 2011. At the time, there was obviously a lot of macho culture. There's a lot of people who are attracted to engineering as its image of being a lot of heavy industry. So a lot of
Yeah,
people
okay.
think engineering and they think oil and gas, mining, out on oil rigs. It's deep drilling, it's heavy equipment. And that doesn't help in terms of showing the breadth of engineering, which can be a little bit off-putting for some. A lot of people just aren't interested in working on the high seas or working in the middle of nowhere in nothing when you're sweating and wearing overalls all day and getting dirty. But engineering is a lot more than that. And I think that's the broader image part that comes from it. And even when you look at what um, women and girls are selecting, it starts very early. So it starts
Okay.
from when you're making your GCSE selections or your standards in Scotland through to your A levels and your highers, and then through to university selection. Of there is that, well, there's areas that feel more like you, feel more like things you're comfortable in, and that's okay. But it does mean that you end up with a self-selection of an image as to what a certain person looks like.
Right.
And I believe that's one of the problems you have. Even when you get through to an engineer studying an engineering degree, the experience of studying it can be off-putting to think I've put up with 4 years for the undergraduate masters of
Mhm.
having a certain attitude from either from fellow students. I don't want to go into a workplace that also has that attitude, and I'd rather go and do something else. There is a large amount who study engineering who never do engineering again afterwards. They go into accountancy, they go into auditing, they go into very maths-based career levels because engineering is uses lots of maths. But actually, the engineering itself isn't the bit that's for them. I do believe social media plays a lot in this as well because, again, it shows the heavy industry. It gets glorified to a certain extent, and it
Right.
does make it a little bit off-putting when even engineering can be as simple as you're taking a recipe for a food and you're wanting to manufacture it larger scale so it can be sold in supermarkets. You are taking a new vaccine and you want to mass scale that from a small in lab production through to a large scale. It can be as simple as improving the efficiency in how the electrical grid's set up. It can be the water network and can you identify where water's being lost on the system due to pressure changes, flow changes, that kind of thing. And it is that kind of breadth that people aren't aware of.
Okay.
Even when most people hear engineer and they think of the person who comes around to fix the boiler or fix the internet, and that's not really engineering for most people. Within the UK, engineer is not a recognised term. Anyone could call themselves an engineer. So you could be doing something that's actually not what many people consider engineering. There is the several institutes for engineering. So I'm a chartered engineer with the Institute of Chemical Engineers, which means an independent bodies assess me and perform, which make up the Engineering Council. And again, you end up in a very traditional field as to what does engineering look like even within those areas. And I think a lot of that is off-putting for people, particularly for younger girls and young women who don't want to be going out and putting overalls on and getting sweaty, or they like to work in a more female-friendly environment.
Yeah, well, understood. I guess this plays on to the next question. Why do you believe there's a significant lack of female representation within STEM fields?
I've heard the phrase of it's a leaky pipeline. So we talk about the pipeline to bring people into the industry, but it is the stages of people are lost on the route. Good way. It's a good analogy for the losses you experience as people go from GCSE through to the degree, and even once they start doing the engineering fields of it's that little drip, 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 drip all the way along. And that's how you end up with steady losses. But I will admit, I had the bizarre experience of when I was at university. It's when I started my degree, I think it was 10% of the class were female. By the time we hit our final fourth year for the masters, it was 25%. And it was because more men had dropped out of the course because they hadn't actually achieved the qualifications necessary to stay on for the undergraduate masters because you had to maintain the 2-1. All the women maintained the 2-1, but there was large chunks of men who were struggling to maintain it. So it meant that it became more female friendly as the degree progressed.
Yeah, true. Well, I guess it links back to what you're saying. If you decide that you do want to do that and you're happy with the image side of engineering, then you'll stick at it and you'll excel.
Yeah, it was one of those awkward ones of I was lucky's probably the wrong way to phrase it, but my summer job I had when I was at university, when I worked in this contracting firm looking at different types of smaller power generation, it was a small office. It was very computer based, but actually despite there being, I think I might have been the only woman within the team I was working in from memory. But actually, they basically said, you're an intern, we'll just treat you like your standard intern. So there was less of that macho culture. But at the same time, it was very traditional engineering. So every Friday afternoon, we would all go down to the pub and I would be sat there as an undergraduate student, and they'd all go, "You're a student, you don't have much money. What would you like to drink?" So I was on vodka tonics, and it was just non-stop vodka tonics for a solid hour. And all the contractors from the different firms all went to the same pub on the Friday lunchtime, and they were all drinking and talking about what projects they were on. I just sat there and listened. I learnt a lot.
What you remembered, you.
Yes, what I do remember.
That's good. So yeah, so it can be inclusive then, and that's sort of helped you foster and well grow within the space. Then you felt sort of accepted.
Yes. I was going to say it was one of these weird ones from a feeling inclusive side of things that I've had throughout my career. Of a lot of the roles I've had have been very technical, but they have been recognized within the nuclear industry. So as I mentioned, I've done the work in the control room. You tell people you worked in the control room, nuclear power station within EDF, everyone knows what you've done. Everyone knows that the qualification levels you have to do. When I worked in independent oversight, everyone knows what independent oversight, they know what the work involves, and they know you have to be highly skilled in order to do that. But it meant that when I walked into a room, I was saying to people, I'm here as independent oversight. My experience is working in a control room. And they would recognize that and therefore be able to know my background and therefore that my opinion came from an educated place. So in some ways, I was justifying why I was there, but I had a shorthand justification because I could name two
Yeah.
very special roles. And I'm aware that's an experience not everyone has.
No, understood. Understood. Okay, so many industries are crying out for engineering talent. It's an area with, well, significant talent shortages, skills gaps, and ultimately an aging workforce. How can we attract more talent within engineering?
So, as I mentioned several times, education is the big factor, letting people know what the careers are. But I do believe retention is as much of an issue as recruitment when it comes to engineering. Having a well-rounded benefits package and openness as to what that is. So seeing adverts that say it's a competitive benefits package, it's competitive holidays, it's a competitive salary, it's a competitive pension. It's okay. So if you believed it was competitive, you would be able to boast about it openly and you'd include it. The other factor is, I believe, supporting retraining, reskilling, and
Okay.
doing the continual professional development aspect of supporting it. The engineering industry is going to go through a large change due to artificial intelligence. A lot of the
Okay.
traditional calculations and technical work AI should be able to assist with. Engineers will go back more to doing the oversight of the work that AI is generating rather than doing the work themselves. And I do believe a training is required to help identify when AI is generating artificial information or making things up as it goes along, as the models have shown that they can do. In some ways, it's not that different to what's happening a lot within engineering, where the engineering within the UK is very much checking the work of others, whereas the actual delivery, the calculations, and the production of work is outsourced to international engineering companies in Asia, and then it's brought into the UK and then double checked that way. Because of this, training is important, upskilling important as we engineers move around. There's always been an assumption that because you're a qualified engineer, you're able to know and learn everything, but you have to set that time aside to do the study. And making people do it in their personal time is poor. So it's not a surprise when people are going, if you're not going to train me, I'm going to go to someone who's training me and do it that way.
Okay.
Uh,
So it's not so much attraction, it's more retention and reskilling, you'd say.
I would 100% say so. One of the things that always annoys me is you see the adverts go out saying, we need engineers, we need engineers, we need qualified engineers, we need experienced engineers. But actually, when you look at the companies who are calling out for it, they don't run a graduate program. They don't run apprenticeships. They're not doing that initial hard work themselves to
Yeah.
get the qualified engineers. They're just upset that it's not magically being produced in front of them. And there's a lot
Yeah,
of,
okay.
well, why isn't the government doing it? Why isn't the government saying, you still need on the job time. You still need time sat with a mentor. You still need time going through this. You've learnt the technical stuff within university. You need some of the practical side of things in work. It's why to become a chartered engineer, it's a minimum of 4 years post-degree experience. It's
Mm-hmm.
similar to driving. You've passed your test, you've got to learn how to drive properly now. Engineering's no different. But a lot of the companies aren't willing to put the time and effort into getting those new graduates, go, right, we're going to invest 5 years in you so that you're fully qualified at the
Mm-hmm.
end of it and so that you are able to do the work. They just want to be able to press a button and an engineer magically walks off the shelf who understands all their systems, all their processes, and knows what's going on.
Yeah, it's not going to happen, is it?
Nah, not really.
Looking at the industry overall, current projects tend to be hugely over budget and extending project timelines. What are the main hurdles and how can they be overcome?
So there's broader issues within the UK when it comes to our infrastructure and how we spend and invest in it. Some is
Mm-hmm.
that there is a lot of dithering about decisions being made, usually because they're very expensive. And it's not surprising they're expensive. We're a small island, small amount of space, and you have to use a lot of space to do the big work. You either need access or you need to do some drilling, and it's going to cause issues. The Labour government are obviously looking at the planning side of things. The Conservative government before them looked at the planning side of things. And it's still slowing things down because, rightly, you have to consider what are the environmental impacts of the work you're doing, what's the impact on the local community, what is the impact more broadly in the surrounding area. We've got lorries driving up and down the roads. You have to consider not just tailbacks on the motorways, but also, are you going to be creating more potholes? Are there narrow streets you have to negotiate? That kind of things. The other aspect is coming back to the skills issue. So talking about the nuclear industry in particular, our last nuclear power station was built in 1995 before Hinkley Point C started construction. So we're talking 30 years ago now since Sizewell C started generating. So that was construction finished. And most of those people, unsurprisingly, retired since that happened. So you're having to start from scratch in terms of what does the groundworks look like? What does the drilling look like? What does construction look like? What do the amenities look like? What do community relations look like? And you have to build the skills back up again. The Hinkley Point C has the biggest crane in Europe, Big Carl. You had to train someone up how to drive that crane. And that means a brand new set of skills in terms of everything that's ongoing. The good thing is that there's HPC 1 and 2, and then it's moving on to Sizewell C, which the government have just agreed to give a load of funding for. That should help reduce a lot of the issues for Sizewell C because we've already got the skills qualified, trained up and ready from HPC. They just need to move across country and start doing it in Sizewell C now. So it should get faster. But we then still have the issue of every other engineering skill set, every other engineering project. It takes time to train people up. It takes time to do the work. And the planning is of not just from a environmental planning and getting it through consultations, but also there is all the planning internally of where does this pipe go? Where does this cable go? Where do we access to pour concrete? Because you have to consider the bedrock. You have to consider the routes it's going to come in, all that kind of thing. You have to maintain concrete pours 24/7 when you're pouring so that you get a single consistent pour. It's a lot of time that goes into it. And that's just the basics for a nuclear power station. Never mind, we have to upgrade grid infrastructure for it. We have to consider water usage. We have to consider where is this workforce going to be living during the construction stage. It takes a lot of thinking time. One of the guys I used to work with was actually working on HPC after they'd finished Sizewell B. That's how long people have been talking about Hinkley Point C being built. 1995, they've been talking about it being built.
Wow. Yeah, the timescales are huge, aren't they? And then I guess the cost is astronomical, and you can't really afford to get it wrong, can you? So you're best off doing it once.
Pretty much, yeah. You can't really knock it down and start again. Like if you build a house wrong and building controls come and go, that's not right. So you have to knock down, start again side of things. But yeah, you only have to look at even something as simple as building a house. There's obviously grand designs on Channel 4. How many times they go, and it's over budget, and it's overdue, and that's a house.
Yes. No, yeah, it's a good analogy. So the industry is constantly evolving with new developments continuously being introduced. Looking at SMRs, do they have a place in the energy mix?
Yes. Short, simple answer is 100% yes. I believe that the energy mix should be as diverse as possible, mostly not just because there's the lines that come out again of, well, the wind might not blow, well, the sun might not be shining. It's like, yes, but you also have to shut down power stations to do routine maintenance on them. Even coal power stations needed shutting down for maintenance. Gas power stations need shutting down for maintenance. The interconnectors that we have onto the mainland can trip. They can have faults. We also have the fact that when we're using our interconnectors, we're buying electricity from the continent and from Ireland, and we're selling it both ways as well. They might actually have a shortage of electricity, and therefore their prices might be too expensive for us. You need a diverse mix to handle all of it. And limiting yourself to one technology opens yourself up to risk because of it, because there could be a common failure and you need to shut down all of them because something could go wrong. I firmly believe that SMRs are part of a good plan to try and diversify our grid connection, add some stability, and try and get things more balanced. I believe wind is a brilliant contributor, but we cannot ignore the fact, and I'm going to go slightly techie here, it's an asynchronous generation form which adds instability onto the grid frequency and onto the grid voltage levels. We need some synchronous baseload generation in order to add some inertia onto the grid to ensure things remain level. If you end up with an unplanned trip such as we've had with historically, that can cause a grid frequency fluctuation, and then we have to look at load shedding on national grid. So that is the very techie answer in terms of diverse electricity builds diversity into the network, means we can withstand fluctuations within either demand or supply more readily, and we're less likely to have the lights going out for people in their homes.
Understood. So you've led teams, mentored teams, and what are some of the best traits to successfully motivate and inspire teams?
So one of the things I'm always keen on is that everyone's an individual, and what works for one person doesn't work for everyone else. Recognizing not only that, but also what motivates yourself, you can't put on other people. What people look for in job is as diverse as the individuals themselves. So it might be a case of they come in because they want to be told they're doing a good job. They might want to come in for the financial rewards. They might want to come in because they actually enjoy the social aspect of work. Some people might just be only looking to come in, do their hours, and go home again, because what motivates them is at home, and that's okay. And recognizing that people are different is a big factor in it. One thing that is common for everyone is no one wants to come in and waste their time. You don't give them work that is essentially doing nothing. You don't get them to do something, then have someone else's job be to undo that work that they've done. People like to feel useful. They like to know that they're doing something productive, even if it's a case of just recognizing that they're contributing a small part to a bigger bit, and making people know that their work is valued is important. And I think a big part in motivating people, it's not the big speeches, it's not the big celebrations, but it's the day-to-day reminding people that they are valued. Particularly as different generations are motivated differently. Gen Z and millennials are motivated better by short, more frequent recognition of what they're doing rather than waiting for an annual appraisal. And I think that's something that's actually a really good feature to have in a workplace, where you are telling people you did a good job today, and rather than waiting until the end of the month to tell them that.
Understood. It's good advice. Well, this is the final question, and it's a question we always ask our podcast guests. What's the most valuable piece of advice you've ever received throughout your career?
The most valuable piece of advice I've ever had is probably, there's two things to it. One is shy girls getting out. Always ask. You never know when it's going to lead to something that's interesting. The worst that happens is someone says no. And therefore, it's always worth having a ask around and finding out. Be inquisitive about what's going on, find out what people are doing, and look at it. You never know where there might be something that's actually of interest to you. The second one is don't focus entirely on always the next move up. Sometimes you do need to broaden what it is you're doing. And that means sometimes looking at the sideways move. Sometimes it's going at the diagonal move. So my current role was a sideways move from my previous role. The skills are completely different. The working hours are completely different. The people I interact with are completely different. And it's actually been a really good move for me because it's given me that extra flexibility that I value. And I've actually learned a lot more from it that I wouldn't have learned in my previous job.
Understood. Okay, well, thanks for joining me on the podcast. It's been great chatting with you. Thank you.
Great chatting with you too.
That was Conversations with CSG. I'm sure many professionals will relate and see value in the insights shared. Stay tuned for further insights from industry-leading professionals on our podcast, Conversations with CSG. Thanks for listening.